in the garage today. Back in the garage today. Get in the garage. Back in the garage today. What's going on, guys? Back in the garage today, getting ready to work on my sister's 2012 Ducati Multistrada S Touring. I got all that out. We're getting ready to go on a big cross-country trip. She needs some new tires put on, so I'm going to do that. So I figured I'd film a video today to show you how to remove the wheels and also reinstall the wheels on one of these Multistradas. So let's get to it. Okay, so I'm going to start out on the rear wheel, and you noticed I've taken the saddlebag off over here on the side just to give me a little bit more space to work with. First thing we need to do is remove this clip on the rear axle nut. And if you look closely, you can see this one's been safety wired on, which is a good practice. So I'm going to clip this safety wire off, and then we're going to pull this clip off of here. Okay, so now with the clip off, obviously this is a single-sided swing arm. A normal socket is not going to do the job. You actually need a specialty tool to do this. Here is the specialty tool that I have. I will try to put it down in the description below. I'll try to find a link to it. This sits down over, and then we can just put a regular ratchet on here to break this thing loose. I would recommend picking one of these up if you own one of these Ducatis and you're going to be traveling on it. It'll fit under the rear seat, and should you need a tire replaced or you have a blowout or whatever, a lot of shops, unless they're a Ducati shop, are probably not going to have this at their shop, and you don't want to be stuck. So pick up one of these. They're not cheap, but man, they will save you a lot of strife out on the road. So anyway, we're going to crack this thing loose. And the nice thing about the single-sided swing arm is this is all we have to do to pull this rear wheel off. Now you may have noticed before I go do this, the first time I've pulled these wheels off is I put it back down on the ground. I just wanted a little bit of added pressure instead of having it on the center stand. So we're going to crack it loose with it sitting on the ground, and then when I go to spin it off the rest of the way, I'll put it back up on the center stand. Thing is on there. Okay, so fast forward a couple of days. I had trouble getting this thing off the other day, so I ended up using a 3/4 inch drive impact with a reducer down to 1/2 inch, and got it loose. I'm going to spin this a little bit, and now we'll put it up on the center stand. Now, so unfortunately, I don't think I can get the wheel off without removing the muffler here. So it may be different on your model. If you don't have the Termione exhaust, and you've got, you know, a different Multistrada that's got, you know, the traditional factory exhaust on there. So let me take a look at this thing and see how it's going to come off. So I'm going to start out on this top bolt here that comes off of the rear peg stay. That is a 6mm Allen, and then you're going to need a 12mm box end on the back of it. Okay, so with that bolt out, it's going to be tough to see, but there is a spring under here, so I'm going to grab my spring puller and undo it. So with the spring unhooked that you can probably see down here, I got some gloves on, this thing's a little warm. Just pops right off of there. Now we're going to come back here to the lug nut. Set that aside, and this thing should pop right off of there. Alright, we got the rear wheel off. Just remember where these spacers go. You've got one that goes here. We've got this other one that sits in here. We're going to set those aside for right now since they want to fall out anyway. Okay, now we're ready to move on to the front wheel. Now you noticed I put a jack with a block of wood under there. That's just to help balance this thing a little bit, because we are going to be removing some significant weight off the front. We don't want it to tip over. If you don't want to do it this way, that's fine. Just do your rear one, and then you can put this thing up on a wheel stand. I have one. I just like doing it this way. So let's get to work on this thing. Okay, so starting here on the brake caliper, we're just going to go ahead and remove that first. These are two 8mm hex bolts. Back those out, and then we'll pull the caliper out of the way. Okay, so with the bolts removed, just be careful. We're just going to slide this back on the rotor. I remember these things were kind of a pain to get off last time I worked on it. Okay, so instead of letting the brakes just hang there, because I don't want that extra tension on the brake lines, I'm going to grab a couple zip ties and just kind of zip tie them up here onto the fork, and then we'll move on to the next couple of steps to get this front wheel off.
Okay, so with the brake calipers zip tied up, next thing we're going to do is remove the ABS sensor that looks like an 8 mil.
Now one thing is you have to be careful on this because there are going to be some spacers depending on your model. This one's got, looks like 4 spacers. Just set those aside. You got to remember to put those back on. And then all I'm going to do is just kind of tuck that wire underneath the fender here just to keep it out of the way when we get ready to pull the wheel off. Next up, we need to take this nut off. All right, so using a 30mm socket, we're just going to break this loose. We don't have to take it all the way out yet. You just want to break it loose. All right, so next up under here, we've got 4 pinch bolts. It's a 6mm hex. Just back these off a little bit, and then we'll be able to pull the axle through. Okay, so you can see I pulled the axle through. Just watch where your spacers are. Now all I have to do is just pull the front wheel out. All right, so you can see we've got the new Dunlop Road Smart 3s put on the rear tire. If we walk over here, see we got a brand new set, or a brand new tire here on the front as well. Let's go ahead and get these things mounted back on. We're gonna start out with the front. Okay, so with our spacer back in place, make sure you've got the ABS ring here. That goes over on the left-hand side of the bike because obviously our ABS sensor is right here. Now we just need to line this up and get the axle back through. Okay, so with the axle back through, we're going to take the axle nut and go ahead and start turning it down. Just a reminder, there is a washer on the back of there. Now before we damage the ABS sensor, make sure however many spacers you had, go ahead and get those placed back over. Get that back into place. I couldn't find a torque spec on this, so just tighten it down. Just keep in mind, it's just plastic, so you don't want to over tighten it. The last thing you want to do is snap or crack the plastic. All right, so next up we're going to torque down this front axle nut. I will put the torque specs up on the screen depending on if you're using newton meters or foot pounds. Now what you may have to do is go ahead and torque these pinch bolts down once you get it tight. Again, that was a 6mm hex on here. I will put the torque spec on there for those 4 bolts as well, and then we'll be able to torque this axle nut down the rest of the way. All right, front axle nut's done. Next we're gonna move on to the brake calipers. Okay, so with the brake calipers, just get those back over the rotors. Slide the bolt in. My sister's got this inspection sticker plate she doesn't use. I'll put the torque specs up on the screen. Make sure you use your, I believe these are the 8mm hex, and just torque them down to spec. And then obviously we are going to do the same exact thing over here on the right hand side of the bike. Okay, so with the front wheel done, I'm going to go ahead and pull the jack out from underneath the bike. We have no need for it anymore, and then we'll move on to the rear wheel. All right, so before we do the rear wheel, just a couple things to be cognizant of. Obviously, we've got the axle going through here, but if you look on the back, you see those 4 holes, and if we look over here, we've got 4 lineup pins that we got to get aligned with. So just make sure when you put this wheel on, they're aligned with those 4 pins. I'm going to do that real quick, and then we'll get to torquing this thing down. Okay, so with the wheel in place, we've got our spacer that goes in. We also have a washer that goes on top. Now we're going to take our big lug nut, go ahead and hand tighten that down as far as we can. And we'll take our special lug nut socket, just tighten it down a little bit more. Make sure it's in first gear so this can't rock forward. I may end up taking it off the center stand just to give me a little bit more pressure on this to keep it from spinning. But we're going to go ahead and torque this thing down to 170 foot-pounds of torque. Once again, I'll put up all the torque specs on here. and then we're done with the rear wheel, and all we'll have to do is put the exhaust on. All right, so you can see I've got it down on the floor. We're just gonna put our torque wrench on, get this thing torqued down. Okay, so we're not quite done on the rear wheel. See these, let's see if I can get zoomed in there, or focused in. See those two holes there? We've got to get that snap ring on. I'll show you what it looks like once I get it on there. So here's what it actually should look like. I backed it off a little bit and then retorqued it down. You can see this clip coming up through that hole right there. See, we got it safety wired. It's torqued to spec. We're good to go. Okay, so this is fairly straightforward. We're just gonna slide the muffler back over top of the pipe there, kind of get it lined up, and then get this spring hooked back on. Alright, sorry, I kind of blocked the view there. Got the spring on, we're going to put the bolt and the nut back through, and then we're done. Just a reminder, it's a 6mm hex, and then there's a 12mm nut on the back of it. Alright guys, so that's how you remove and reinstall the wheels on a Ducati Multistrada 1200. Few things, number one, clean up your spacer on the front before you put it back on. If your axles are dirty, go ahead and clean them up. Always put a little thin coat of grease on both of the axles before you go to put everything back together. Make sure you pump the front brake, because chances are you backed off the brake pads a little bit. And whether you ever plan on changing your tires or taking your wheels off or not, buy one of those sockets, because you may be on a long trip, and if you're not at a Ducati dealer, chances are they're not going to have it, and you might get stuck. So for the less than $100 it costs for one, well worth it. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider hitting that subscribe button, because if you like motorcycles, well, this is the place to be. If you have any questions about anything, let me know down in the comment section below. I'll do my best to answer them, and as always, I'll talk to you again soon.